Welcome to the Breakthrough Advisor Podcast. In this podcast, we inspire advisors with ideas and pathways to break through barriers and build a thriving retirement income business. We will interview innovative technology developers, business leaders, and successful advisors, then help you organize and execute these ideas to move your business forward.
Hey, this is Jack Martin. I'm the virtual CMO for Simplicity InsurMark. I want to welcome you to the Breakthrough Advisor Podcast today. This is where the leading advisors in the country are coming to get a regular fix on what's happening to level up their practice. We've had an awesome 24. We're going to wrap it up with David Grau. David, welcome to the Breakthrough Advisor Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. I love being on a podcast where the first couple of words out of your mouth are marketing, and we're talking about advisors.
That hardly ever happens, right?
I know, right?
Hey, David, for the two or three people who listen to this podcast who don't know who you are, catch us up a little bit. Who is David Grau Jr. and what are you all about?
You bet. So David Grau Jr., I am the president of Succession Resource. We are a consulting organization. We are headquartered in Portland, Oregon, although post-pandemic, our team is mostly remote all over the country. We tell folks we know a lot about a little. We focus exclusively on succession planning, mergers and acquisitions for independent financial advisors. So it is what we eat, sleep, and breathe, and what we have done now, me personally, for a better part of 20 years under the Succession Resource Group banner for a little over a decade now.
Hey, so this is kind of a busy time of year for you, I would think. You know, people trying to clean up their balance sheets, get their ducks in a row, maybe signing some deal terms and so on. So, what's cooking Q4?
It's it's kind of funny because mergers and acquisitions, I suspect for all of our colleagues industry wide, the industry lenders, it's a little bit of a barbell. You've got Q1 and Q4 where there's just a ton of activity. We all mean well in Q2 and Q3 trying to get things taken care of when we have free time, but there's just a lot of deal activity industry wide, and that sort of all comes to a head in November, December as people try to get things wrapped up, closed out, and then get ready for January. So this year has been much like those in the past. Deal volume is at the same levels we have seen, if not higher, every single year. Probably isn't surprising. I mean, I know, Jack, you go out to the industry conferences like I do, and it doesn't matter what room I stand in, whether I'm at the back of it or up on stage. The audience kind of all looks the same. They've all got white hair or no hair. So in an industry, that's doing a little bit of graying, we're finally starting to see succession planning happening a little bit more proactively. So the average age of advisors, we haven't seen the silver tsunami that I think Michael Kitces has talked about over the years, but it's definitely out there, and we're definitely picking up pace, which, as a succession planning consulting firm, we love to see people getting proactively engaged in this subject, just not in December.
That's awesome. So one thing you said that I want to pick up on is the pace of mergers and acquisitions. And the old white guys in the audience. Okay, so Cerulli says 100,000. I've seen 140,000. In the next decade. It seems like a lot of guys feel like they're chained to their desk. So they don't want to kick the boots off, right? So I saw a headline recently. It said deal supply is exploding. So maybe has the pendulum swung a little bit, or are advisors now finally getting it? Maybe there is something more than just, working 8 to 6, chasing new advisory clients, or what? What do you hear?
I suspect when we talk about deal volume exploding, that's obviously headlines, but it definitely is picking up pace. And that has been a consistent trend we've seen happening now for the better part of the last 6 or 7 years. I think it's in large part due to what you described, Jack, and that is the folks, we call them RIPs. They're retired in place. They built a great book of business. They take great care of their clients, but they're not in growth mode anymore. Like, they're not looking to complicate their lives. Well, there's a lot of those in the industry. I would tell you, we've got a pretty good marketing team here, and they'll send out, let's say they send out 1,000 emails, in a week for something. it doesn't matter what week we send those 1,000 emails out, we will get at least 1/3 of those bouncing back with out of office replies. I mean, I would guess at any given time industry wide, there's probably 2/3 of the advisors actually sitting at their desk, 40 hours per week. Well, that's mainly because there's a lot of folks who are on the back nine of their career. Well, when you start seeing industry multiples where they're at now, interest rates, people talking about multiples, maybe sort of capping out, I think we're just getting a lot of folks who they're kind of retired in place. They work 15, 20 hours per week, take good care of their clients, finally deciding like now is maybe the time. I think it's in large part due to the fact that so many advisors I talk to, especially at the conferences, even now, I think they view it as sort of an analog option where, like, Jack, you can either retire and sell your business, and you're not ready to do that, or you can stay and keep working. Well, there's actually a lot of room between those two field goal posts. And I think as more and more broker dealers, custodians, TAMPs, organizations like yours work to get the good word out, people understand there's more options, they're starting to get engaged in the process a little earlier. And that's why I think we're starting to see an uptick in deal volume. Not because there's magically more sellers. They've always been here. There just wasn't a great option that they were aware of.
So, my DNA is financial advisor, as you know, and so I think what we feel is what our clients we're trying to coach through retirement are feeling, right? And so for some of them, probably more than us, they've kind of pointed towards, age 62, age 65, age 70, 73. They've got kind of got a target that they're pointing at. And I'm not sure that advisors we have, the cobbler's family has no shoes, right? So we've really thought about that. And so now a little behavioral finance comes into play, right? So what's the risk of my getting out of the business, and what am I going to do? So that's the first thing: is the wife going to commit homicide, or what am I going to have enough money? Is there some of that coming into play here?
I have to imagine, again, when I first started doing this up until maybe 2013, 14, everything that we did around mergers and acquisitions, succession planning, it was all seller financed, which basically meant if I bought your business, Jack, whether I was your internal team member or your colleague down the street, what I was really saying is, I'm going to buy your business, Jack. You're going to give me the income that you are getting, and I'm going to try and give that back to you over a couple of years. Well, if that's the alternative and you're already not working that hard, sort of in retirement mode, the idea of me buying your business and giving you 2 or 3 times the revenue, you just keep it. And so that's where a lot of folks were. Now I think they're starting to understand that there's bank financing, there's broker dealer financing, there's just more capital available, which does a couple of things. Number one, it's a little more enticing to folks contemplating getting out because I don't have to be the bank. I don't have to give you my money to give back to me. I can get mostly cash up front, if not all cash. And for the buyers now with the bank financing, they can go finance it over a decade or more, which if I've got 10 years to pay it back, all of a sudden the current industry multiples that we were seeing, they don't seem quite as high as they used to be. So you've got a number of different factors happening now. The awareness is going up. There's more capital than ever before. I think those things together, combined with the age of the average advisor, we're going to keep seeing the retirement trend, I think, picking up pace. I just hope the next gen is there and there's enough of them ready to catch all of this.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. What I think a lot of guys miss is the cost of inaction. There's a stat you gave me a few weeks ago, and I think you said 90% of succession plans fail. And the most common reason they fail is because there isn't a growth engine in place. Okay.
Right.
And so what you just said about founders now kind of winding down 15 to 20 hours a week, taking care of clients, that doesn't sound like rainmaking. You know what I mean? That it's kind of the opposite end of rainmaking. Okay. And so now the
Right.
rainmaker has gone on hiatus, and you haven't built a growth engine. And so now, whatever multiple you were able to get last year probably is a little bit less this year, a little bit less more next year, right?
Yeah, 100%. And it's not a big deal. For example, Jack, you want to start cutting back from 40 hours a week to 30, eventually to 20, some point, maybe 5 or 10 or 0. That's fine as long as there's somebody else helping push, the poor rock up the hill. And it's not just Jack, because if Jack stops showing up, 1 day a week and then 2 days a week, then the growth just slows. And all of a sudden the clients are now just getting older. We're not adding new clients to the mix. So it really does, I think, come back to how do we make succession planning more about growing than it is going? And that's very doable if we have the next generation that we're mentoring and training or building them up, or we're bringing them in from the outside, maybe through a merger. It's fine to cut back and maybe just do rainmaking, to your point. I could do that if I only had 15 hours per week, if I only had that one thing to do. The problem is they don't necessarily always have those teams. They don't have the sustainable growth engines, marketing, podcasts like you're doing here. I mean, there's lots of ways to grow the business. Unfortunately, the way that most advisory businesses have grown is through the founder. Well, when the founder's cutting back and working less, then the growth slows, and that doesn't help our spreadsheets. Let's start there.
Yeah, yeah, and so if I'm a buyer of a business, so yeah, I could sell to a junior partner, and we could talk about junior advisor
Yeah,
model in a second. Or I can go to an aggregator, right? And so what the aggregators have lots of money. I mean, they got PE capital in addition to bank. I mean, it seems to be like, and now there's sovereign funds that are flooding the capital in. So
right,
the aggregators don't have a shortage of capital. But they're looking for something pretty specific. They're looking for a sustainable business,
right.
and so they're not looking for a guy who's a rainmaker. They're looking for a process. They're looking for people. They're looking for technology. They're looking for a strategic plan kind of thing, right? And that influences the multiple they're going to get. So that's really the cost of an action, isn't it?
1000%. It's, I think a lot of folks I know a lot of folks get the emails, the letters from these aggregators who are looking to do deals. It's how they grow and scale their business. But yes, you are spot on. Everything you describe, what they're looking for is a business, not a book of business. Subtle distinction in terms of, the terminology and the language, but I mean, couldn't be more different in practice. To your point, the business is the one that can operate, as the owner slows down and eventually leaves, there's something left behind. Like there's a team, there's a process, there's the people. That's what they're looking for. The aggregators, and frankly, most buyers, like they're not trying to buy a job. They already have a job. So if what you're going to give them is a book of business that they have to take over, onboard, get familiar with, and then begin figuring out how to service, I won't say there's not buyers out there for that, because we have plenty. But the multiples that folks are hearing and that they ultimately want, those are multiples paid for a business. And that requires us to invest a heck of a lot more time and effort and create something that ultimately can maybe someday exist without us. It's not easy, but definitely a reward on the back end.
Yeah. And it's not an unattainable thing. I mean, if I've run a solopreneurship, okay, and now I want to exit, if I want to get some value out of that, I've got to build an engine, okay? That doesn't mean I got to hire 20 people, or I got to lease a floor in one of these vacant office buildings or something, so it's not that requirement. It's what the aggregator is looking for. We did some work with Stewart Partners and with Jim Gold, okay? And his words are, we look for predictable future revenue. Okay. So he doesn't say what that has to be. He doesn't say where that has to come from, but
Right.
he's a finance guy. He's looking for predictable future revenue. And so if you've built some kind of referral engine, if you've got some kind of a niche, if you're leveraging, some expertise that you have, all of those are good starting points for a growth engine. It just takes, it's like planting a garden. You can't just throw the seeds out there and hope something's going to grow, right? You got to put some effort into
Well, it may be why I don't garden.
it.
But I
You and
mean,
me
you're
both.
spot on, and that's why, again, if they're not looking to buy a job, they want to buy a business. You're right. I mean, neither you nor I said that means it needs to be 10 million or 50 million in annual revenue or profits. It's not size agnostic. I mean, 'cause at the end of the day, if you've got 100,000 in annual revenue, no, you're not going to be able to build systems and processes with people. Like there's some scale that is needed, but it doesn't have to be a huge enterprise. It is just more about creating the systems and putting the people in place to execute on those systems consistently. And I jokingly mentioned sort of the beginning of this about marketing. Like that just isn't something really industry wide that has been a focal point. And I don't want to take anything away from the success that so many advisors have already had, but asking for referrals and doing good work for the current clients is not marketing. Like I would definitely not sacrifice that, like keep doing that. But at the same time, we hear it all the time. You and I talked about it before. One of the biggest consistent complaints we hear from founders is that the next generation can't grow the firm like they did. Well, number one, I mean, there's literally a book out there. What got you here won't get you there. It's definitely a different skill set. But number two, if you have built the book of business and you've grown it, and the business can't grow if you left, then you just can't leave yet. Your job is not done. We need to put in place the marketing engines, work with the next generation to create a business that can grow independent of its founder. And honestly, to your point, you could do that at $1 million in revenue. You could do it at 10 million in revenue. And I certainly hope you've done it by 20 or 30 million in revenue, but not all firms have.
Yeah, 100%. The and even for the smaller, a million-ish, okay,
Yeah.
there are tuck-in opportunities, okay. You're probably not going to get a big press release, if you do a tuck-in with somebody, but you're
Right.
still going to get a nice multiple, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're still going to have, a way more capital than if you just let it bleed out, right?
Yeah. I mean, 100%. It's regardless of the path you pick, it is just about being intentional about it, to your point. And if it turns out that you don't want to build an enterprise and take over the world, okay, well, either figure out how to operate, lean, mean lifestyle practice. And to your point, Jack, maybe tuck in, plug in with an existing firm that can capitalize on your areas that you don't like dealing with, or go build the enterprise. The key, like all things in business, is just don't get caught in the middle. Like that's where we see folks really start to lose sort of the passion for the business. They got out of the lifestyle business, but they haven't quite got big enough where they've hit their stride, taken advantage of what it means to be a true enterprise. And they just end up getting bogged down with all the stuff that they really didn't love doing to begin with. And they're not big enough yet to have people to sort of push that work off to. Those are the folks who then, in many cases, they'll end up doing a deal with an aggregator or a tuck-in, to your point, where they have to seek some external solution. But those are the ones when it gets to eventually wanting to sell. If you're sort of stuck in the middle and you're not large and super efficient yet, but you've definitely outgrown the efficiencies of the lifestyle practice, you won't get as much out of the succession process as most folks were initially hoping for. So don't
Yeah.
get caught in the middle.
Yeah, the thing that surprises me is how many guys still think the junior advisor model is the way to go. It's kind of like, no, I don't have to do all that other stuff. I'm not going to sell to an aggregator. I'm not going to do a tuck in, and I'm going to hire a couple of guys, and we're going to work together, and we're going to kind of grow this thing, and then they're going to buy it from me. Okay. Okay, so the economics are still the same. Money's money, right?
Okay.
You
Yep.
you you expect a multiple from those guys, and the bad news is they're probably toting the note, right? Excuse me, you're toting the note on that. And
Right.
so if they can't get growth, then you got this albatross back, right?
Correct.
So I think Kitts has talked about this with Carl Richards a couple of years ago. That we've kind of it's the byproduct of how we started in this business, right? We started in wirehouses and we started in captive insurance companies, and we kind of grew junior guys and so on, and that's kind
Right.
of how we proliferated. And but that's not the way the world works now, right? I mean, so what's been your
Yeah.
experience with this junior advisor situation? What are the things that our listeners should be on the lookout for if they're thinking that way?
I mean, it is tricky, to your point. It's hard to find good talent. I mean, that's not like an industry issue. That's all businesses. It's hard to find good talent who can come in, and even if they don't have any immediate skills that you need, that you can train up, that they have the appetite for it. Now imagine how hard it is to go find one of those key employees who we also want to someday be our successor. Like, I want to take this W-2 employee who I hope can be a key contributor in the firm. And I also hope that they're going to be an entrepreneur and they're going to want to take on the same level of risk that I did. I'm not saying it's not possible, but if I was a betting man, I would also go put it all on black as an alternative, like, because I might have better odds. Like, it's really, really hard. So what we see folks do and have success with is not trying to recruit to solve their succession woes, where, well, you know what, I've got 100 million in assets and I'm ready to start slowing down the next couple of years. Jack, go find somebody to come join my firm and be my successor. I mean, I literally have heard that conversation so many times. And every now and then, broke clocks right twice a day. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but the better solution usually is plan A is plan for internal succession. Build your farm team of talent, hire young folks. Initially, it's going to feel like it's an expense because it is. You pay them and you get really nothing of use. In fact, stuff will probably actually take longer initially while you have this expense. But as they're riding shotgun with you, you're mentoring, you're training, they're not all going to stick. But if you hire 2 or 3 of these folks and you keep 1 or 2, you've got a pretty good batting average. After 2 or 3 years, they can actually start to do something useful in the practice. And you'll think, all right, well, maybe there's some legs to this idea that David Grau was talking about so many years ago. By year 4 or 5, they're actually starting to see some C&D clients solo, like not your more complex cases, but with your mentorship, you still around, they can actually start to take some work off of the lead advisor's plate, which is nice. And by year like 6 or 7, they're taking on some B clients. They're starting to have capacity constraints themselves, and you did this again, and you're pushing work down from them to the next advisor who you've been hiring and training. You start to build up momentum. Next thing you know, you got your peers looking at you from the outside wondering, like, where's he getting all this talent from? Like, where's he recruiting it from? When in reality, you're not recruiting it from anywhere. You'll take the easy wins when you can get them, but in the meantime, you're building your own farm team of talent. The really cool thing is, even if those folks end up not having the appetite to buy the business, or maybe I just don't get enough of them, they're too young, they're too old, who knows? By virtue of building that farm team of talent in my organization, I now have a business that maybe someday could exist without me as I take my foot off the gas. That's what every buyer wants. Aggregator, localized peer, banks, roll-ups, they all want a business that can operate independent of its owner.
Yeah. And the 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 flip side of that though is if you start down this path of recruiting and growing talent, if you don't have the engine to support them to get them to success,
Right.
and they're manufacturing success themselves, it's not unusual for them to wake up one morning and say, "Hey, why should I take a piece of the pie? What I know and what I do, I can go get the whole pie myself, as opposed to paying Jack, for this legacy thing, that really I'm feeding."
Right.
So, I mean, that's the thing that Michael talked about is, we're shooting ourselves in the foot in a sense by doing that model because most of us don't have the engine built in place to support those guys. And when we ask them to be rainmakers, heck, why don't I take the whole pie? So,
Right.
you seeing that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a prevalent model out there because, as you already outlined earlier, sort of the history and evolution was folks started at a wire house, cut their teeth, got their licenses, got trained up, and then they went and started their independent practice, built that up. And then, some of them decide to go RIA, some of them don't, but they've established their business. And then to grow and scale, they want to bring on younger advisors and have those folks do the same thing that they did. Go build your book of business. Well, basically 1 or 2 things are going to happen. I'm going to bring folks over, and 9 out of 10 are not going to be able to grow a book of business, which is probably the same ratios that you see at Ed Jones, Merrill, places like that. You keep the good ones and the rest blow out after 3 years. So either I can build my book of business or I can't. And to your point, if I come join you and I can build a book of business and I can service the book of business after a couple of years of your mentorship and tutelage, guess who I don't need? You. And then when you compound that with the fact that you got a lot of founders, when that starts to happen, starting to work a little bit less because they see light at the end of the tunnel, like, oh, Jack can actually do a good job. He can grow this thing. I start to work less. You're putting in the effort. You're growing it. You're right. We end up with a really awkward conversation in a couple of years where I want you to pay for all this growth when, in fact, you've been contributing to a big part of it. So the key is, I think, build your internal team, focus on getting specialists as you grow, not generalists. I mean, that's where most folks have been, is they're trying to find somebody who's kind of a generalist, which is what you need to get the business off the ground. We need somebody like you and I, when you start the business, your chief cook and dishwasher. But as you grow and you get a little bit of size and scale, like even your first hire, I get somebody just to answer the phones. Like, that's a specialist. I'm not great at answering phones. I have too many other things to do. I'm going to hire somebody to do that one thing. If they keep carrying that theme through, eventually they realize, like, it's a lot easier actually to hire somebody who's what we call a farmer. They can come in and they can just service my book of business my way. And if they can do that, it frees me up to go be a rainmaker or maybe work with folks like you to figure out, like, what does marketing mean and how do I grow this thing so that someday I could leave it?
Hey, David, you're absolutely right about that. And so before we sign off, what are a couple of things if we got a listener who's kind of at the point of saying, David's right. I probably ought to start to think more seriously about this. So what are the things that I should start to put into place? What are the things I should start to look at in order to make this transition? What are the key drivers of what I'm going to get? What are the the general systems I need to have in place? Give me some direction. Where should I go?
I would say probably the first fork in the road is, I mean, the things we all collectively should have done a better job about when we started our businesses is figuring out, where do I want to end up? Like, what do I want to build? Do I want to build a really nice, easy job for myself where I make good money? I don't have a lot of complexity. I don't have to mentor and train people. If that's what you want, great, own it. Because again, as we've seen industry wide, there are a lot of lifestyle practices, but I think sometimes they get sort of a bad rap where people feel like, well, I only do 500,000 in annual revenue, fees, trails, whatever it might be. That's not a bad thing. Frankly, I've seen a lot of lifestyle practices that they take a lot more to the bottom line. They take a lot more home than firms 5 and 6 times their size. So figure out what you want to end up with. Do we want to end up with something really simple, easy to run until I decide to pull the ripcord and then exit stage left? Or am I trying to build my empire? Big, small, we all have various ambitions, but if I know my goal is to build an enterprise, then let's make sure we are executing on that efficiently and effectively and start to figure out, talking to an industry full of professional planners, you think this would be a lot easier than it is. When do I want to be able to retire? And if I don't have an answer to that, when do I want to start cutting back? If that's 2030, okay, well, I've got, 5 years at least at this point. What do I need to be doing between now and then? Kind of like a financial plan for a client. If we know what you want to end up with, give or take, and we have some idea when you want to retire or slow down, even if it's written in pencil, I get it. Then we can start collectively working our way backwards to what do we need to be doing now to make that a more viable exit option. The other one I would say is watch your financials. Like whether you decide to build an enterprise, simple lifestyle practice, or something in between, just know your numbers. It's that old, I think it was Peter Drucker who said it, what's measured improves. Get your profit and loss statement, look at it once a quarter. If you stare at that thing, you know the numbers on it, you'll see the trends, you can compare it to last quarter. Sort of start to act a little bit like a CEO. You don't have to spend a ton of time on it. But again, what's measured improves. I think watching your financials is not a bad thing to do. Asking a barber if you need a haircut, I'd say value the business annually. Even if you work, with a competitor of ours, you work with us. We publish industry multiples twice a year. Use the average multiples. It's not a valuation method per se, but you can get close. Track the value of your business. Keep it on your personal balance sheet. Again, it's usually one of your most valuable assets. If we're keeping that sort of top of mind, it's just a lot easier to focus on managing it. Like you and I, Jack, we've got homes. We know that there's a market for it. We know it has value. And we know we're not going to live in it forever. So we're generally good about upkeep and maintenance. I want advisors, whether they decide to build a large enterprise or a simple lifestyle practice, internal succession or external sale to an aggregator, try to make sure that you're keeping the thing fixed up. You've prettied it up. You remodeled the kitchen. You've done this work. If you do the work, you will get the benefit out of it. And you know what? If somebody's listening and says, actually, this all sounds great, but I'm going to give my business to my kid, my son or daughter, my nephew, great. I can promise you they would rather take your fixed up practice over the fixer upper every day of the week and twice on Sunday. So I think it's just about staying abreast of what's happening right now with M&A, multiples, value drivers, and detractors. If they stay on top of that once, twice a year, they will get more value out of this thing. And the nice part is then along the way, they'll start to identify areas, key performance indicators where maybe they're really strong, give themselves a pat on the back, maybe some areas for improvement. And if we're doing this stuff proactively, we can make adjustments.
Yeah, so I want to come back to where we began. This really is a marketing conversation, and someone may be shaking their head going, nah, this isn't a marketing conversation. This is a finance bro conversation. No, this is a marketing conversation. Okay. Just like you look at your balance sheet and your valuation,
Yep.
you've got to be looking at your growth process. You got to be looking at your growth model. We look at it in 4 stages. How are you doing in converting leads into prospects? How are you doing at converting prospects into meetings? How are you doing at converting meetings into clients? And how are you doing at converting clients into evangelists? And if you start to look at each of those and you look at the end-to-end kind of experience, you got a conversion rate. How many of those leads are you converting into evangelists? And so I can tell you that the average firm is converting something close to 4 to 6% of those leads into clients, much less evangelists. And, that means 95, 96% of the effort, is left on the field. So, just like you're looking at the finance, you've got to look at the growth engine. You got to look at your growth framework, break it down. What are the processes? How can I improve at each of those steps? How can I get aligned with what's happening in the marketplace? Because the marketplace has changed a lot since COVID. Consumers are smarter. They have access to more tools. They can get chatbot, for crying out loud. They can get all those questions they used to call me and ask. Now they just go to ChatGPT and they get them asked. And they say, hey, Jack, ChatGPT said this. What do you think? Yeah, that's about right. So, the world's changed. And, you got to pay close attention to the financial. I love the fact it starts with vision and plan, but you also
Right.
got to pay attention to your growth model. So,
Yeah. I mean, it's just such a hard topic. 'Cause I mean, I don't know what you all would recommend, but when I walk around like the exhibit halls, I mean, there's hundreds of vendors at some of these conferences. You know how many of those vendors are marketing companies that could actually help me, let's say as an advisor, figure out what exactly marketing is and how to go do more of it? I'd be walking around a lot of aisles before I'd find one. Like there just hasn't been a lot of good resources. So, I mean, it kills me when we see their finances and we'll get their financials through the valuation work. And it's, I mean, maybe 1% of most P&Ls that they're spending on marketing. It should probably be like 10x that in a perfect world. But I think most of them don't know where to spend the money.
right. I mean, they're willing to go pay for steak dinners, for 30 people,
Yeah.
to talk to them about Social Security. But, that really is such a small piece of the pie. There's so much more to it. You're absolutely right. Spot on.
Yeah.
Hey, this has been a great conversation. David, thank you very much. Anything in parting you want to, any wisdom you want to, let me ask you this. So what are a couple of things that David Grau does when he's not doing succession planning for advisors that would surprise our listeners?
It would surprise you. I mean, I'm an avid runner. I mostly because if I'm not actively running and making myself do the work, then I'm thinking about succession planning, and you can only think about that and keep fresh ideas for so long. So definitely an avid runner. Really enjoyed, despite all the traveling I do for conferences and speaking at them, I still really enjoyed traveling with the family. More so now that I think my youngest is 6 or 7. In my defense, I have 3. So the youngest is either 6 or 7, and the oldest is now 10. So traveling is actually back to being fun. They're not trips anymore. They're back to being vacations. So yeah, travel with the kids. And I would say running is probably the other one. It's a good chance to listen to audiobooks and podcasts, which I don't have a ton of other time for working remotely.
It is. Because of my knees, I'm a walker, not a runner. But it absolutely, helps keep the mind clear. So, hey, this has been awesome. Thank you very much for joining us. Hey, folks, this is the Breakthrough Advisor podcast. Please like, share, subscribe wherever you get your podcast delivered to you. Until our next episode, we hope you have a great and blessed holiday season. Have a terrific time, and we look forward to talking with you soon. For the Breakthrough Advisor podcast, this is Jack Martin and David Grau Jr. signing off. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Breakthrough Advisor podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of InsurMark. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only.